everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Coming Together, a series on understanding the social dynamics of Singapore and facilitating dialogue between locals and foreigners on various topics, from current affairs to social norms. This series is in collaboration with theWhiteHatters.sg, a local NGO that seeks to foster greater understanding and integration between the communities in Singapore. My name is Rindo, and the topic for today is integration. Joining me here is Shahrani Hassan, Suhail MD, Melissa Fitzgerald, and Xian Bang. Let's do a quick round of introductions, and I'll start with myself. I'm Rindo. I'm from India. I've been living here for 10 years, and while I'm an IT professional by day, I am the host of the podcast Living It Up in Lion City, and I'm also a comic artist who goes by the name Charsu Samosa on Instagram. Over to you, Shahrani.
Hi, I'm Shahrani, usually known as the Connector, because I try to communicate people and communities together. Founder of theWhiteHatters.sg, which is basically a local NGO that focuses on issues that underpin the state of social cohesion in Singapore. And we also look to promote responsible advocacy and activism. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Suhail. I am a freelance writer, former journalist, and I focus on issues of race, religion, and social cohesion. So, happy to join all of you for the conversation today. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. Hi everyone. So my name is Melissa. I'm a freelance writer as well as a content and community manager. So my day job is energy reporting. So this is very different, and I'm excited to be here. I'm actually from San Francisco. I've been here 3 years in Singapore. I write about a wide array of topics: lifestyle, energy reporting, like I mentioned, and also racism. I've also written for online publications like Honeycombers, BuzzFeed, to name a few. I've written a children's play, and also most recently a book. So I'm also the token white girl, so thanks for inviting me, guys.
Hi, I'm Shimpang. I'm a photographer. I'm mainly focused on portraiture, but I do have a bunch of work that is based around like social work, related photography.
Okay. Thanks, Xian Bang, and welcome everyone. And I'm so glad that I'm able to have this conversation with you guys. So let's set the context. This is the year 2021. We are in the midst of an unprecedented medical and economic crisis that is stressing Singapore and the rest of the world in more ways than one. One of the more important conversations that's been happening in Singapore recently over the last couple of years has been about the presence of foreigners and concerns and questions about integration. So to get this dialogue started, I did ask I asked you guys to write down a couple of points on what you think integration and what integration means to you. So perhaps I could start with what I think integration is in 3 points that I made. So I'm just going to pull up I hope you guys can see this. Right. Okay, so point 1 is understand norms. Point 2 is friendship. And point 3 is don't poke local pride. So those are the points that I feel integration, those are the key characteristics about integration for me. What about you guys?
So I had written down respect, harmony, and listen. And basically, I thought the idea behind the respecting is just everyone deserves respect. No matter what you look like, who you are, you deserve respect unless you're like a serial killer or what have you. And then maybe not. But for the most part, I think everyone deserves respect and should have it. Harmony, I think it's important that as much as possible we do try to be a harmonious community and a society. So I think that everyone should just be allowed to live it the way that they want to live, really, and somehow we come together as a community. And then listen. I think it's a highly undervalued tool, and I think that a lot more of us should try to do better when it comes to listening to other cultures and different people's backgrounds and what have you. I think we learn a lot more. So those are my 3.
Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you.
All right, I'll go. Okay, right. So the 3 words I have are individual, community, and diversity, right? When I think of integration, I think that integration fails if we lose a sense of ourselves So I think my individual identity is very important. I don't want to lose it to some greater, and just become like a mesh with everyone else, right? I'd like to retain my autonomy and be myself. But community, because we can't just be purely individual, right? There has to be something greater also, and I think that's one of the aims of integration, to have a cohesive, kind of a harmonious society, as Melissa was mentioning just now, right? So as much as individuals are important, but at the end of the day, we are able to function as individuals because of a wider community, right? And the third point is actually diversity. So diversity is, so it's not just about allowing me to be an individual or allowing various communities, but also to celebrate and accept that there are a lot of diversity, right? So even within a certain communal group, there will be a lot of different sorts of diversities within the group, so on and so
Yeah.
forth. So I feel like these three things ought to be respected, and it's what I think of when I think of integration.
Thanks for that, Sohail.
Okay, so the three words I've picked is connection, cultural understanding, and communication. Um, yeah, because these three C's I find very important, especially the fact that cultural understanding is such a such an important part, because I feel that most misunderstanding comes out because a difference in culture made us a bit more hostile. Um, Communication is another one where, I mean, the fact that we have to have some level of communication to be able to understand each other. Yeah, and having a connection, just being able to meet one another, that's the most important point, where you really can learn from each other.
I agree.
Yeah.
Thanks, Shangbang. Shahrani, do you wanna
Can you
pitch in?
see it? Okay, so it's understanding, tolerance, and acceptance. Yeah. So basically, I think
Yeah.
we should always be guided by the fact that it's important to seek to understand rather than be understood first. And of course, with understanding, there comes tolerance and eventually acceptance. I don't think we're there yet, and that's why we need to have ongoing conversations on issues that affect social cohesion. And I think being a cosmopolitan city-state as Singapore, I think integration is going to be an ongoing hot topic in good times and in bad, particularly in bad times like right now. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. No, I agree with you. No, so thanks for all of those opinions, everyone. I think I'm sensing some common themes here. Number one of community and communication. So these two aspects seems to be the key facets for any sort of cultural integration. So I think all of us are pretty aligned in that respect from what I'm seeing and what you guys have been talking about. So that's actually pretty good. I was kind of sometimes when I've had conversations with friends about integration, I feel like the definitions, vary. And of course, it is subjective, as they should be. But at the same time, sometimes we feel like we're talking about two different things. So, and I believe this is probably one of the reasons why it's so controversial today. And I'd like your thoughts on this, guys. Why do you think the topic of integration is so controversial? What's triggered it, and what's been going on, and why is it what it is today?
I think particularly now when the economy is so bad, when we're actually in a crisis, the loss of job, the loss of livelihood becomes of utmost importance. And I think the presence of foreigners tend to paint the picture that foreigners are here and they're taking away our jobs. So that's why there's always this resentment. And particularly now, because of the pandemic, there's a lot of people have lost their job, businesses are closed, and there is this sense of nationalism, and we are seeing it a lot in the West, and we can also see it a lot in Asia too, and it could be a cause for concern if we don't manage it well. That's why I think the effort towards integration, it has to be ongoing, starting with dialogues and how we can reach out to the various communities. Uh, on that note, I think it's very important also to remind ourselves that integration is a two-way street. Um, while we do expect non-Singaporeans to actually integrate in the local community, as Singaporeans, we must also be more welcoming to the non-Singaporeans. We can't expect or demand for them to integrate without reciprocating. I think we're seeing a lot of that. You can just go to various online forums, and there's a lot of vitriol. It's kind of scary sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, so as part of that, as part of research over the last couple of years, for the podcast, I've been lurking on all of these forums, and honestly, it can get pretty soul crushing. The negativity can really get you down. So, yeah. Does anyone else want to pitch in?
Yeah, so I think identity is one of the main reasons why there are integration issues, not just here but anywhere. But especially in Singapore is the fact that we don't really have like a single identity. It's not tied to race, it's not tied to language, it's not tied to, because we are so mixed, right? It's a bit hard to, and because Singapore is so young, there's the culture is the cultural history is not as long as say US and other countries. So for a lot of people that sense of it's a bit like people are a bit confused with their own identity sometimes here. So that feeling of um, that's why like anything that is different, anything that is foreign just feels very, it feels, for a lot of them, for a lot of Singaporeans, it feels like it's an attack. Yeah. If I were to
Interesting.
put it that way.
Could I just ask Shenbang, like when you said
Yeah.
we don't have a single identity, could you give an example of countries which are diverse and have an identity, like a strong
I think
identity?
okay. I think US is a pretty clear example. You have people from so many different races and culture, like different ethnicities, but they all identify as Americans. But Singapore is a bit, how do I say? We have Singaporeans from various ethnicity, but Singaporeans still don't see them as. There are some Singaporeans that still don't see them as Singaporeans. So that's where it's a bit tricky. Yeah.
But Shagundak, may I ask, is this are those Singaporeans the exception or the norm?
I would say there are exceptions. Yeah, but you know the loud
But
the
there,
voices are always the loudest. You know.
Right.
but there's plenty of Americans who don't see a lot of Americans as Americans, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
So when you say the American identity, what is the American identity?
Pop culture and music.
We have a token American here, so
Oh yes, of
He's
course.
right here. No, it's okay. I'm learning.
so Melissa, what's your take on the conversation?
Yeah, no, I think that with regards to that, I think integration is challenging in any country, and I think that it's maybe easy to look at a different country and say that they're doing a great job, but there's so many things looking back at the marches that we had during the whole Trump situation, where he really allowed for racism to kind of take its hold around the country, which was really scary. That was one of the reasons why I left. But I think in general, here, I think that when I first moved here, and bringing it back to Singapore, is I felt that it was harmonious. I guess I thought that, just being new here and seeing things like the great museum you guys have here that's like, I forget the name of it. It's like Harmony and Races or what have you, and Cultures. You have a museum that's like basically associated with that. But in general, when I was here, I just really didn't see any racism, I guess, at first. And I know that also that's part of my white privilege. I understand that. But I think it's like a bit swept under the rug a bit more, and it's kind of risen since I've been here. The longer I've been here, I do see a lot more things that I didn't really notice before. So that's been interesting. Like, I remember when I was looking for apartments, and we had looked in the bomb shelter, and the gentleman showing me around was like, "Oh, this is where the helper sleeps," ha ha ha. And I was like, "Oh," like I thought it was a joke, and he was serious, and I was just like, wait, in that steel like container? That's so things like that where I just didn't really think about it at the time, and the more that I've been here, I have seen a little bit more of that to where I'm like, oh, okay, it's just like not really talked about, and now it is, which is great. That's why we're here.
Yeah, yeah.
Thanks for sharing, Melissa. Sorry, yeah. The reason why I asked you about, I wasn't trying to just zoom in on you, but the idea of the Singaporean identity is something that I've been struggling with. I identify as Singaporean, right? But what I mean is that when I ask my friends and myself what is Singaporean, no one can pin it down. And then we'll give an example of a foreign country. And then when we ask friends from the country, what does it mean to be, Malaysian or to be Indian, right? They can't pin it down either. There is no you can't pin it down. But here's the thing, right? Everyone sort of feels it. You kind of sense it that, hey, this person's Singaporean, right? Especially when you go overseas. And I like to that's why I like to just provoke that idea a bit more. Would we have xenophobia if the Singaporean identity was not there in the first place, right? How can I say that these foreigners are not part of us when I don't know who I am? There has to be some sort of, bouncing point, right? Some sort of contrast for me to say that they are not us. If you don't know us, we can't have a they. So I think part of xenophobia is because the Singapore identity is getting stronger and solidifying even more. Now the question is, what's the content of that identity? And I think that's where the issues come in, right? So for me, unfortunately, during COVID, especially when the Delta variant hit, we realized that, maybe for some Singaporeans, the idea of Singaporeanness does not envelop as many Indians as we would like because of the anti-Indian sentiments, right? Just even during the National Day rally, PM Lee was talking about the national Indian athlete, Singaporean Indians, who sadly came out on the banner. And people were wondering, are they even Singaporean? But that's not a question that was asked of the Chinese family, right? No one asked whether that Chinese family is from the PRC. Although, there are a lot of new citizens from PRC as well, right? So I guess, for me, the issue is not so much about the Singaporean identity, whether there is or is not, but it's more like what is the content of it. So, which is why I feel like the point of integration, I think back to Rindo's earlier point about why it's becoming an issue, is because I think in some places the extra integration means you become like us wholesale. There can be no difference, right? But I think that's where the idea of integration fails, because you don't want people to lose their sense of self. Yeah. So those are just like some initial thoughts.
So, Sohail, about your points around having a stronger national identity kind of sets the, tone for xenophobia, or rather discomfort over the presence of foreigners. I mean, are those things mutually exclusive, though?
No,
being welcoming to foreigners and also having a strong sense of identity.
They're not mutually exclusive. The reason I made that point was in response to the point that, we might not have a clear identity. But what I'm saying is that if there was no clear identity, there wouldn't be us and them, right? You wouldn't be able to distinguish that. So,
right.
Having said that, then my next point was, what is the content of that Singaporean identity? So that's where, Rindo, your question comes in. Is it mutually exclusive? Well, it doesn't have to be, right? If we include that sense of, openness and that sense of community within the idea of the Singaporean identity, right? So no, I don't think it has to be mutually exclusive. In fact, I like to think that because Singapore is a younger nation than a lot of the other countries in the world, we are able to actually form this in our foundation and make it even stronger than some of the older, for lack of a better term, civilizational nation states like India or China, right? Or Japan. Yeah, so I actually think, I totally agree with you. It's not mutually exclusive.
Okay. Well, I mean, as a keen follower of online rhetoric, I tend to find a lot of conversations around integration interesting. I think the bars to integrate are often, ever changing. The goalposts shift all the time. The pressure to integrate, waxes and wanes depending on, whatever domestic or political pressures, are at play. The controversy around integration is specifically around foreigners, and from what I understand is that I think a significant chunk of Singaporeans feel that foreigners are benefiting from the system in ways that Singaporeans are not. So personally, I see that there is a strong economic incentive to have lesser numbers of foreigners in the country. So, and I feel like that's the overarching theme around the discomfort. So in that background, is integration really a magic bullet to anything? So if I could maybe provide some examples, probably some flippant ones, but I know that there's a lot of conversations around, and I see this in speeches and stuff. It's like, learn Singlish, try durians, and these are all things that I do and I love. But at the same time, if I'm seen to be in a position of privilege, if I'm seen to be, living an affluent life, at the expense of locals, do these, points of integration really matter?
Are you saying then, Rindo, do you think if we even do those things, do you feel like they're just not going to be enough, like regardless, perhaps? I mean, that could be one way to take it. I think for me, I had a really different experience when I first moved here, to where I was at a job where I was only surrounded by Singaporeans. So I was like a fish out of water, which was a great experience for me. Everyone was either speaking like Malay or Mandarin, and it was kind of lonely at first, but then I got used to it, and I especially had a great relationship with, I'll call them my work wife and my work husband, which were like my buddies at work that would take me around, and we'd have Singaporean food together all the time. They'd tell me the best hawker centers to go to. So I had a very different experience, I guess, than my other friends that are in the expat group that I hang out with sometimes, whereas they say they really didn't have that. I almost feel like we should have like a Singaporean ambassador for every expat that comes here, or foreigner, to where you have like a buddy and you're paired up, and that's kind of maybe part of the way that you understand the culture, and then you could speak to that, because I felt like they didn't really have, some of my friends don't really have experiences like this to where they could say like, oh, it sounds like you've had such a wonderful experience, and I really haven't gotten to know that many Singaporean people, because maybe the things that we like to do aren't aligned or what have you, or maybe they have a family, they don't want to go to happy hour, whatever it is. But I think that it's just, if you have to make an effort, and I think that goes without saying for everybody across the board. That's kind of like my thought process, just make an effort.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you, Melissa. So I think this is a fairly, common trope across expat circles where, especially when you first move here, I think, you want to have your priorities set first. Number one, finding a place to stay, focusing on jobs, figuring out, settling down, and, all of these, steps that you have to take before you think about trying to, expand your circle, so to speak. So, and this is a journey that I've gone through. I remember, I think the first 3 months, it was just a constant process of trying to, get my bearings and stuff. I think there was also the intense loneliness. So I think that was a huge motivator for me to knock on every door, join up for everything, just so that I can make friends. I remember the early contacts that I've made, looked at me as desperate, but I was like, I'll take it, because, so loneliness was my motivator. So, and I do believe this is the case for a lot of expats who, while they do feel this need, to connect with locals, there are often significant barriers, mostly by way of time and effort. There needs to be some way to, make that easier, and I agree with you on this. But I will perhaps, take a step back and also look at the larger conversation around whether integration is important, and I agree with everyone here on this. But is integration does it have as big an influence in the current state of affairs as we think it does? And I think that's what I want to really dive deep into.
Well, I agree. It's not a magic bullet. Definitely not. In fact, as you mentioned, the economic problems persist, and a part of me, and this is not something that is spoken about online often. I've not written about it. Is that I think if there were no foreigners and the economic crisis persists, then you'll just find another scapegoat, right? Some minority group, or the minority, I don't mean someone who's even, I don't even mean like a racial minority or whatever. It may even be like the elite minority, right? In terms of, I mean minority in the demographic sense. Yeah, so there'll always be some sort of scapegoat if there are certain conditions in society that are not met, right? So yeah, bottom line, no, it is not a magic bullet, right? Likewise, the economy going well is also not a magic bullet, right? Then you have
Interesting.
issues of inequality, right, which is what gave rise to, you know, like if you have to talk about the median income, if you have to talk about the economic indicators of the average Singaporean, it has increased vastly since the 80s, 70s, right? Inequality is greater, but the bottom line, the absolute poor are gone. We do have poor people here, but the absolute poor, I wouldn't say they're gone, but they're, it's far less than it used to be, right? So those issues are gone economic-wise, but we still have issues of social cohesion. So different challenges will come up. And I think what I definitely 100% agree with you, Rindo, is that we cannot have a magic bullet mindset, right? There is no one solution. There are a lot of factors that we gotta look at.
Yeah. I agree with you. Shanbang, any thoughts on this? I remember we had a conversation about this a couple of days ago over a couple of beers. So
Yeah, I mean, like what he said, integration isn't a magic bullet, but it does make things a lot easier, especially when, I mean, look at Singapore. We are a global city. You have people from nearly everywhere coming here to work and live. So you can't really ignore the fact that you don't want to integrate. It's going to happen whether you like it or not. And for people here, it's all about how to manage it. It's all about management. You want people on both sides to be relatively happy. That's the hardest part. It isn't about like making sure one side or the other is better, but making sure the voices on both sides are kind of level-headed. Yeah.
well, I mean, Shanbang, in an ideal world, yes. But, we also live in an environment where, the polarizing voices get the most airtime. The polarizing
But yeah,
voices
that
are the
said,
ones that
I
influence
I
dialogue.
feel that the integration here is so much better than so many other places that I've seen or heard, because um it's never gotten to the point where it's really really bad, like say 50 years or 60 years ago when we had racial riots. you know that's a thing of the past now. Yeah.
Okay, that's
We
fair.
do have minor issues, but it's never to the point where it becomes an issue on ethnic lines. Yeah, on racial lines. Yeah.
Well,
In terms
I
of
mean,
integration, it's
yeah, okay.
pretty balanced. Yeah.
There have been some incidents here and there which
Yeah.
have been quite
Yeah.
disturbing.
Yes.
But yeah, no, I hope that it's not a part of an emerging trend. Okay. So I think if we're
Could I just challenge it a bit? I'm sorry. I definitely agree. We don't have the race riots that we did 60 years ago, right? But we didn't have Indians being beaten up because of a virus 10 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
if you're going to compare, right? I mean, I can say 300 years ago we didn't have race riots at all, right? so it's all very relative. Okay, my last point was just I was just kind of pulling your leg, but essentially, yeah, I think although I do agree, I'd rather deal with our set of problems in Singapore right now than the more challenging sort that wouldn't be there if you did not have that baseline of social consensus on multiculturalism and racial harmony, so on and so forth. So that I definitely agree with. What I just wanted to challenge is that yes, there are issues. Although I guess I take issue with the idea of like it's a minor thing. Yeah, but that was just to clarify on my end.
No, thanks for that point, Sohail. I mean, it's important to clarify that. I'd like to maybe take a step back and go around to talking about prevalent notions of expats in the foreigner communities in general, especially in Singapore. So in this call, there's myself and Melissa, who are foreigners, and we do read a lot of what's going on. And as much as I'd like to say that the comments on social media are that of a vocal minority, they are an influential one, and they are influencing discourse both on the ground and in Parliament. So one of the more, prevalent notions of expats is that they're not integrating enough. And I understand it, especially if those who move around in expat circles do see folks who are not in the least interested in, integrating and whatnot. But I really want to get a sense of what percentage do you think, what percentage of expats do you think are not integrating? I think it's very important to get that sense of proportion. So, Shanbang, Sohail, like in your subjective experiences, do you feel that expats are, not integrating as a norm or an exception?
Do you want to go first? Yeah.
I need to think about that a bit. Well, I'll just say what's on my mind, like what I'm thinking through rather than just staying silent. So first thing.
Go for it.
No, because I'm thinking through it, and I thought I'd just say it out loud. So I'm thinking out loud. It's not a polished thought. So basically, first of all, the idea of the expat, right? What is an expatriate? Are we talking about employment pass holders and above? Are we talking about PRs? Well, PRs are considered residents in Singapore. They're not citizens, can't vote, but they're residents. Do we consider them expats? It's a very vague term, right? And historically, the expatriate community is referred to generally as Westerners, right? And by Westerners, I mean like fair skin, white skin. You then call an African, who's earning the top part. They don't figure in your imagination as the expatriate in Singapore, right? Globally too. And when we talk about the expat, well, plenty of PRs become citizens every year, right? So if you take expatriate broadly to mean the professional class of workers from overseas who have integrated in Singapore, a lot of PRC expats have integrated, so have a lot of Indian expats, right? The population, the birth rate of the Indians and the Chinese community has been below replacement level significantly since the 80s. Yet the absolute population of those groups have increased, right? That is obviously being supplemented by foreigners previously, right? They were formerly from PRC or India, and they've become Singaporeans. You don't see that. So there is a significant level of integration there, right? And here's the catch about integration. Once they have integrated, you don't feel it, right? You don't feel like there's an outsider. So your eyes are always caught on those who have not integrated, right? So I can't give a percentage. I'm sure I hope someone in the civil service has some sort of percentage. That said, there are groups of foreigners here who will never be able to integrate by design, right? Foreign workers, migrant domestic workers. They're a significant chunk of our population. We're talking about over a million. That's 20% of the island, right? They're definitely not in the imagination of expatriates. They'll never be. In fact, if they even try to sink roots, by law, they will have to leave the country. Like, what do I mean by that? They can't set up a family here, right? But these are conditions that they are known beforehand. So every time we talk about foreigners and the expatriate community, we got to clarify this. Yeah, but no, in terms of percentage, I think the majority do integrate. It's just that we don't notice it because they become part of it.
Yeah, no, I actually absolutely agree with you here, because as part of this whole process, I've been talking to a lot of my friends, who are foreigners, and I think a lot of them are actually quite, sad because of the conversation, because, to them, they have largely integrated, and yet they have to constantly, reveal the fact that they're foreigners and, bring up the kinds of things. So it becomes a bit, difficult. And about the nature of how foreign domestic workers and how migrant workers in the construction industry work, there is, there are policies by design that discourage them from being part of, the regular population, regular discourse even, and that's unfortunate. So, in your opinion, Suhail, do you think that there are certain class considerations when it comes to conversations about integration from the population? Like, by this I mean, do a lot of the angry local comments online feel that integration should work differently for different classes of people?
It's a very good question. Part of the problem, I feel, and this is a very personal opinion, on discussing issues publicly in Singapore on social cohesion, we don't have a very good understanding of class, right? We sense it, but we can't articulate it. So we don't have the language for it, and it comes out in various ways. That said, yes, I think a lot of it is the idea of this globalized elite, right, who are taking away our jobs, who see Singapore as a stepping stone to another place. So they're here to reap the benefits of the hard work of me and my ancestors, right? But they're not here to, contribute. For example, you would hear anecdotal, not recently not so much. I think about 8 to 10 years ago, I heard it more frequently about NUS and our local universities, NUS, NTU, SMU, what have you, granting scholarships to top students from Asia, right, like India and China. But these students coming here, apparently, and I'm not sure how true this is, so this has to be checked out. But they basically get the scholarship and then they leave, and they move on to greener pastures, and they don't have to serve national service for the guys, right? So on and so forth. So it feels like there's an exception for this class of people that the locals do not get. So a lot of these issues do come into play. Yeah. So class definitely has a factor, but we don't have the language to articulate it. So we don't hear it explicitly phrased that way. So
Right.
I'll say yes.
Now, interesting viewpoints, and I've heard this from a number of people before too. So, so we talked about integration, and the common themes in integration at the start of this conversation were about communication and community. So it's about friendship and talking to each other and understanding each other's culture and stuff. But from what you talked about earlier about the stepping stone and folks kind of taking advantage of the system and leaving and stuff. So is there a need for integration to also include some sort of contribution from foreigners, be it economic, be it cultural, be it something? Do you think that contribution is also a key part of integration?
So with regards to integration, I think it's also interesting to what does that mean to everybody? Because I think that when we think of integration, it is that we are part of the culture, we're part of the community and what have you. But if you are from a different culture, maybe don't speak a language that another group speaks, what does that look like, right? So for me, I think integration just looks like becoming as part of the culture as you can in the community. So I think that one of the things that you had mentioned, Renaud, it is kind of disheartening when you see things about, and maybe they are behaving badly, and I'd say that that's probably the 20% of the expat population, probably less than that, but as you said, it's always polarizing, and that's what gets the airtime, right? But I think that it's unfortunate that that's what people see when that's really not my experience, and I actually have a lot of pride in living here. When I talk to my friends back home, I say how much I love it here, this is why. I've had friends that have stayed here that think it's an amazing place to live. So I think that when we think of integration, what does that look like? I think that, maybe there should be a cultural aspect to where we work on a project like this, or we do something else. Whatever our talents are, that somehow it culturally or somehow enhances Singapore's culture in general, right? So I think that would be one thing. I think the other thing is that, this is not my house, this is your house, this is Singapore, so you have to understand that there are different social norms, and I think that just coming into a new culture, that you have to have your eyes wide open and to accept that you're not where you grew up. You're in a different country, you're in a different area, so just be understanding of that, and the same vice versa, to where the other person who sees somebody that doesn't look like them, oh, maybe they're from somebody else and that's how they do it there, that kind of thing. But I think to your point, overall, I think why not? Why not have the people that are coming from different countries somehow beyond just their work that they're doing, maybe community service, whatever. There could be different things that we could all do to kind of just again, kind of intensify the culture here or not intensify, but bring our culture here, or do something that actually will benefit Singapore just beyond like the workforce. Especially with all those expat wives, which is another common misconception. I'm an expat wife, but I still work.
No, thanks for that, Melissa. On the topic of sharing cultural practices and stuff, there's a lot of conversation about that too, which is around importing cultural practices, which a lot of people are uncomfortable with. So as part of this, I've been trying to look at what we're actually looking for. Is it integration or assimilation? Because those are two different things. Integration, vague as it is, has some sort of back and forth cultural exchange, so to speak, that's going on, versus assimilation, which is about being mindful of everything that exists and kind of finding your place in it. So in the larger context of integration today, and talking about integration in Singapore today, what do people actually want? Is it integration or is it assimilation?
I think people here want assimilation, but they don't understand the difference, or they misunderstand and they mix them up. So they think that what they want is actually integration, but it's actually in their heart what they are looking for is assimilation. Yeah.
Okay. I was hoping that would not be the answer, but no, but I kind of understand it, right? Because I think there are some stressors there are external stressors that cause people to want to, hold on to a lot of things, and if there is a bunch of people who are not, following those norms, it can be, hard to stomach and swallow. So, if I were to ask a friend who is from abroad and were to move to Singapore, what would be the bits of advice that I would give her? Would it be about integration, or would it be about, be mindful of local customs and just make sure you don't rock the boat?
Yeah, I would say, yeah, I think most people would try to warn the other party about, like, especially the laws in Singapore, right? Because if you are foreign, you don't know certain aspects, maybe, and then that's where the miscommunication and misunderstanding comes in.
Okay. And any thoughts, Melissa, Sohail? If we were to talk about advice to foreigners moving here, what would be some key things to let them know?
Don't chew gum. No, I think it's important to look at those things before you. So I did a ton of research. I had I think a year before I moved here, so I was able to do a lot of research. And I think just do that. Just go online. That's why we have the internet. Go online, find out whatever, because we do have some funny laws, like you had mentioned, like the walking naked, I guess. Like if you're walking in your own house, you could get arrested if somebody sees you and calls, or fined, not arrested, fined. But in general, I think just research and just be open-minded. Look into the different cultures. We're super diverse here. I hope you love food, spicy food, which I do. So, but I think also just depending upon the person, just maybe remind them to always be respectful. No matter what situation they're in, unless somebody's accosting them, which doesn't happen here, luckily. Yeah, I think that would be my advice. Just do some research.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa.
I think my advice I don't actually remember giving my friends advice when they moved here, foreign friends. Unless I know that they like to take recreational stuff. Then I'll be like,
Okay.
even if you have done it before you come to Singapore, if it stays in your body and you get tested, then you're still alive. But I don't have many friends like that. Yeah, generally I think once my foreign friends come in and they just hang around for a while, they more or less know how to go about things. As personally, I think Singapore is one of the easiest countries in Asia to just make it blend in. It's whether you're talking about language, culture, you don't feel like you stand out. When you go to anywhere in most of the major spots in Singapore. You don't stand out for being different, for being foreign, right? If so on and so forth. What I am noticing in recent months during COVID, foreigners that have hit the news are usually for flouting a lot of social norms and basically the laws that everyone else is sacrificing for, especially during COVID, right? And I remember we had some of the bars opening, and although it was, we now know that lots of locals were also frequenting other bars or KTV bars. The fact that it's a foreigner that just stares up more in your face, right? And of course we have most recently the Breton who was is a sovereign citizen, claims to be, and so on and so forth. So you have these wacky ideas. Yeah, but I would say those are the exceptions. So I wouldn't really warn my friends about anything in particular. Just don't be an asshole, basically.
Yeah. No, that's a cardinal rule that we should all live by. And
Yeah.
I thought that was a given, but clearly that isn't for
Clearly
a lot
not
of people.
for some cases. Yeah.
I was like, please don't be an American. Please don't be an American. But yeah, that happened. I was just like, why? Why are you acting that way? Like you said, just don't be an asshole. Like that's somebody we need to put off into another island. He needs to go somewhere else. And this is just anywhere. Just have respect for yourself, for the people around you. But to your point, it was really funny. When I first moved here, I thought I would be like a fish out of water, that I wouldn't necessarily blend in at all, that I'd be standing out. And I still have those moments. But for the most part, it really hasn't been a challenge, I would say. Like, I never felt really oddly uncomfortable for the most part. It's just, and I remember too, when it was really funny, somebody was chatting with me. I just met, we were having drinks, and I ended up speaking with a Singaporean lady, and she had mentioned, oh, you just moved here, that's great. Have you ever heard of the term that, because she was Singaporean, she was saying that people call it Asian light, or Asia light?
Yep,
Have you ever heard that before?
Yep. Yeah.
And I was just like, well, what does that mean? She's just like, it's just an easy community to basically blend into, to kind of, to put it to our terminology, integrate into, because it is just so multicultural and accepting and what have you. And I was like, I've never heard that term. Is that term like considered derogatory, or is it a good term?
Depends on who you ask, and depends who's talking about it. So Asia Light, especially in the mid 2000s and early 2010s, it was very much geared towards expats who are moving here, and the context was that it's not going to be too much of a shock if you were to move to, let's say, other countries. So the idea was that it's an English-speaking country. It has like all of the amenities that you'd come to expect from a fairly cosmopolitan urban society, and that was the origin and intent. Over time, I think a lot of folks have seen this as a diluted Asia, which and a lot of locals understandably so feel like, what are you talking about? I mean, are you saying that Singapore has no culture? Which is another thing that I hear constantly in expat circles, and I strongly disagree with it. And so so once again, Melissa, it depends on who you ask. If someone welcoming you into the country, it's positive. If somebody talks about it in a bar with no context, they're not.
Well, I'll never describe Singapore as Asia like. I don't find it offensive personally, and like Windows said, I think it depends on the context. But yeah, I'm sure that Singaporeans will see that as like oh great, we are Asia like, like we are advanced, but that presupposes a backward Asia. That's the implicit thing there, right? Which is where the idea, the negative, stereotypical ideas, racist ideas come in. And oftentimes when I hear foreigners, particularly expats, saying Singapore has no culture, so I don't understand, right? Like, what do they exactly mean?
Do you tell them to go to a hawker center?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a culture that is
condo?
not to your liking. Just admit that, right? You don't like it. That's all. That doesn't mean we have no culture. Right.
There's actually a really big conversation about why that's the case. So it's like a lot of tourists generally tend to stick around the central business district and the main tourist areas, and often don't get to see outside of those spaces. So, and of course, there's also a whole bunch of folks who come to Asia expecting the gritty chaos of Bangkok and Thailand, and then they go oh, this is not the gritty Asia I was sold to. I just see a McDonald's there, therefore no culture. So that's the kind of limited lens through which a lot of folks see Singapore. And
See, that's what annoys me about some of these folks. The reason why they come to Singapore is because they heard it is Asia-like. Like it's easier to get into. And then they come here and like, oh my god, it's too easy, I'm not experiencing Asia. Like, make up your mind, right?
I feel like the bigger question actually is asking Singaporean what the culture is than asking foreigners. Because I think a lot of Singaporeans, they might not even be able to answer that question. They're like, huh? And I think a lot of them will say food. Yeah. But it's more, the understanding of culture is a lot more than just food, right?
well,
In other places.
Shanbang, I mean, I
Food
would
is
like
one
to.
of the pillars.
Oh, it is,
But
and I think it's a
there's more
really.
than just food, yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Shanbang, but I think it's also a very big pillar. It's a big, fat, solid pillar. I think, as the old adage goes, the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. And, I think that would apply to anyone, really. It's like, it's one of the easiest ways to get to know a country's culture. And there's something about sharing food, that allows for communication and community. People tend to have more intimate and vulnerable conversations over food, or drinks, however you want to go about it. So I think there is some credence to using food as a cultural totem. Of course there has to be others, but I wouldn't discount that as being not enough.
I'd agree. I think it's like one of the biggest things of travel, right? The first thing you want to do when you go to a new country, I do anyway, is I want to try the food. I want to know the best place to go to get like the best meal or whatever they have within that country, just to kind of see what they're talking about and and kind of experience what other people who are in the country experience probably every day that I would never have the opportunity to. So yeah, I think food's a huge part of it. But to your point, there needs to be more as well, of course, than just beyond food. And there is. I feel like there's a lot of culture here. Just get out of the CBD area, which is a bit, it's beautiful, but it hasn't been here for very long. So go into the other areas, anywhere. West Coast, East Coast. Like, there's so many
East
beautiful
Coast
places
represent.
to go. Yeah. I'm West Coast.
Yeah, I'm tagging you on my last Facebook post. on people in the east going, the whole of
I saw
you
that.
saw that. Good. It's like the whole of Singapore says nothing, and then the East Coast people are like, oh, East Coast is the best, and the rest of Singapore doesn't even care. Okay, so, dude.
I literally sent it to my friend and she cracked up because she's in the East Coast as well. So yeah, it's pretty funny.
Yeah, no.
I see, integrated, the two of you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you guys.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm trying.
So I will personally recommend my neighborhood, which is Geylang. And I think that is the true fusion of, everything, from Singapore from way back in the day to, the modern trappings of, a global cosmopolitan city. So if anyone were to come to Singapore, the first place that I would recommend is Geylang.
Oh, definitely. I would agree. Geylang's not in the east. It's part of Central. Right now, in my mind. Southern
It's
Singapore.
all right, guys. It's fine.
No, but
That's all good. Yeah.
Back to Shenbang's point earlier, I actually get what you mean by saying the Singaporeans, we do have this sort of insecurity, I would say, about culture, right? We just feel I think it's, for me personally, I think it has to deal partly with us being a young nation, right? Just like a couple of half-century old, there's that. And also we did have very interesting cultural scenes post-independence or even pre-independence. But due to various reasons, politics, so on and so forth, there was quite a lot of changes, right? And so I think that's part of the reason why the cultural industry or culture itself has not developed the way most of us would like it to. So yeah, I do get that. But I think that's changing. It's growing. Definitely more. there are a lot more interesting people around in Singapore than I remember when I was 10 years back, 15 years back. Yeah.
I think also about culture, right? It's a bit hard for us to define because Malaysia and Singapore has been so closely intertwined, right? Like our food is so similar, architecture can be so similar, the language, like almost everything, like it's like there's a brotherhood. But then, if you were to say food, then they will say, oh, we also have the same dishes that Singapore has, you know. There's always this fight between who gets to claim what dishes. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's true. But I will say maybe an analogy that I could apply in this context. So I'm from India, and we have similar conversations, with Pakistan and Bangladesh too. So these are sister countries. Of course, we squabble over everything from rivers to borders to cricket, and there's all these similar conversations about food as to where it came from, and but at the same time, we also recognize that even though these are like common foods and common cultural practices and common cultural heritage, we like to think that we are somehow kind of owners in part of all of these things. So it's not necessarily exclusive, but we can carve out a space that's our own. So, all right. Okay, so I think we did, cover a lot of ground around, what integration means, how integration is perceived, and the general, situation in Singapore right now. We also talked about, advice that, we'd give to a foreigner if we were to move to Singapore. And perhaps this is where I should probably give my advice. Anyone who's listening to this podcast, if you are new to Singapore, I think the key bit of advice that I would give you is to just make local friends, dude. I know it's so easy to get stuck in that expat bubble, and it's not even a conscious one. And I can completely understand that. It's so easy to get stuck in it. Oftentimes you don't even recognize that you're in a bubble. But I would urge everyone to take the time to get out of that bubble once you recognize it and make local friends. It will make a world of a difference, and your life will be all the richer for it. So
Here. I agree with that completely. I countersign that as the other expat.
Thanks, Melissa. All right. So does anyone have any last words around integration, or if there's anything that we would like to, highlight?
Thanks for putting this together, Rindo. I think this is really fun.
Yeah, no, thanks for being part of this, guys. I mean, I had a really great time. And before we sign off, once again, this is the first episode of the series coming together. You can look forward to an episode every week over the next 10 weeks. We will be covering different aspects of social norms in Singapore, some fun, some not so fun, some quite controversial. So I hope you'll stick around. We are available on Spotify. We are available on Apple Podcast or any podcast platform that you're part of. We'll also be on YouTube. So if you want to see our pretty faces, check it out. So on that note, thanks Melissa, thanks Suhail, thanks Shahrani, and thanks Shanbang. And until the next time.
Right.
See ya.
Bye bye.